Hey everyone, Laura of Intuitive Alchemy here. I hope you are all doing amazing. Happy newish, I guess, year. Um, I hope that the new year has treated you lovely and been a good one for you so far. So I am here today and we're going to do something a little different. 2024, as I've been meditating into and feeling into some themes for myself and kind of what spaces I should be moving into, sharing what I know, teaching, instruction, all of that has been very, very top of the priority list, top of mind. It's been coming through everywhere. And interestingly enough, I have found a way to combine my work life, if you will, doing intuitive readings and coaching with that of a sort of a personal fascination or hobby of mine. And that latter part has been true crime. Since I was very young, super interested in the psychological makeup, the motivations of those who commit crimes, and sort of the mystery of the crimes that they commit. It's just, you know, been something that I've gotten lots of, egging on and kind of, ribbing from family and friends who sometimes think it's a little bit morbid, but it has always been a fascination of mine. And while I've always done what we're going to do today, which is delve into a particular case and a reading that I have done on that case, I've always done this on my own, in my own space. And it's just been, kind of a way for me to suss out the details and try to solve a mystery. We're going to now bring it into this space. I want to share with you what I have learned, and I want to get your feedback, hear, what you think, what has come up for you. And of course, it's just a really interesting way of kind of having a chronicle, especially as the case unfolds, as more information comes to light. It's a way of just being able to look back and see where some things were, accurate and totally on point, see what wasn't, see, a different way of reading or interpreting what was coming through, be it through the cards or other ways, astrology, intuition, psychic gifts. Just it's a way of deepening my own practice and getting to delve into these cases, but also I want it to serve as sort of a space where you can perhaps start doing this for yourself. If you share curiosities around these sorts of topics and otherwise. So the channel is not exclusively devoted to this at all. As always, 2024 is going to be huge and just in terms of new instructions on intuition, on energetic practices, doing readings on love and money, and other things that we've always done. More so in the previous years, I've taken a bit of a break, but this is going to be a pretty busy year where all that content and instruction and sharing is concerned. So you'll see here on the screen, I'm going to maximize, make that a little bit bigger. We don't need to stare at my face. This is a card reading, and I'm going to explain a little bit about the cards here shortly. But I want to first kind of catch you all up on the particular case that I'm going into. So this is a reading on the circumstances surrounding the unalivings of Matthew Guerra and Savanah Soto. Now, if you haven't been following this case, and maybe you don't know anything about it, I've been absolutely glued to news and to true crimers and otherwise, just trying to keep up to date because it's just one of those that kind of hits you in the gut. So essentially, Savanah Soto, 18, was 9 months pregnant. She was about a week overdue. She was reported missing along with her boyfriend. At the time, they didn't know, is he missing too? Is he involved? There's lots of hoopla on that. But the facts as we know them now are that essentially the two of them are reported missing on the 23rd when she failed to arrive for a scheduled induction. She was a week overdue. She was due to go in, had an appointment for being induced to have their baby on the 23rd, and she never showed. On the 26th, don't mind me, I'm trying to read without my reading glasses. On the 26th, the two of them were found in a vehicle. I believe it was his Kia Optima. It was parked in the back of an apartment complex. It was just kind of, the car was put in a spot and they were found in there with two, pew pew wounds. And had been unalived for some time. So the facts now, as what's kind of additionally come out, is that the police believe that they were unalived sometime in the evening of 12/21. And I believe it was either the 3rd or the 4th. It might have been the evening of the 3rd, and then maybe the 4th is kind of when I saw it in the morning. Because it happened after I had already retired for the evening. But on either the 3rd or the 4th of January, Christopher Preciado and Ramon Preciado, so Christopher 19, Ramon is 50 something, Ramon is the father, were each arrested for capital unaliving. I don't know what words I technically should use in this regard. Christopher was arrested and charged with the capital M, and his father for some other, involvement insofar as after the event occurred. And that's sort of the, sort of bird's eye view of the case. It's unspeakable, just unimaginable tragedy. One that has really captured the heart and the minds of so many people worldwide. I've been a member of some of the discussion groups, and there's just people from all over the world who you just feel so touched by this case and heartbroken for these 3 individuals and what happened to them. This just incredibly senseless act. And there's a lot that hasn't been released yet. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of, voids and, what if this, what if that? And I know that even after the arrest, many of us who have been following, that I've been interacting with, we still have some questions, still kind of feel as though something isn't totally adding up, or that, the complete picture, which obviously we're not going to have at this point in time, and may not until even, the trial or post-trial. But it just feels like there's just something not quite adding up. So I pulled out my handy dandy little Lenormand cards here, as you'll see in the image. And I love Lenormand when I am looking into an event like this. Lenormand is a fabulous tool, for many different life questions. But I especially love using it when I'm looking into sort of a case like this, and I'm trying to solve, a mystery or understand the mystery a bit better. And this tool for me is very good for this because it is very matter of fact. Tarot, which I work with as well, each of these types of tools, Lenormand deck or a tarot deck, are amazing in their own right. So I don't really feel that there's one better than the other. But I do feel Lenormand in this case is a great tool because it's very matter of fact. It's very this and this and this and this, whereas tarot can be a bit more nuanced. And it just tends to be, in my opinion, a bit more vague insofar as when I'm looking up something like this. So I chose to pull a 7-card spread with the Lenormand. If you're not familiar with Lenormand, they're read. There's multiple different ways, but one of the common ways is to read them in a line of 3, 5, 7, 9, always an odd number. And you read them first as pairs. So though the individual cards themselves have meaning, it's actually the pairings, and then also what's called mirroring, which we'll do later on in this. It's actually the pairing. So it's the meaning of these two cards together that ultimately, give us an answer or give us insight. And when you read them completely, especially in a case like this, you get so much detail. And I always tell my students that it doesn't matter if you consider yourself psychic, hint, we all are. But whether you consider yourself psychic, whether you have a well-developed, psychic clair that you work with often or not, Lenormand and tarot both are amazing tools to work with because you can still get incredibly detailed, accurate, insightful readings, regardless of whether or not you're pulling in other tools. I oftentimes do. I use and work with these cards to create a container to confirm what is coming through with my claircognizance, with my channeling of spirit and guides and higher consciousness, and astrology, even, et cetera, et cetera. I find that all of these together, create such a synergistic, detailed, very comprehensive sort of look into anything that I'm looking into. So we've covered the case. We've covered Lenormand. You will see that there's 2 extra cards up here, and that is, one is the stork here. And this happens to actually be the card that was at the bottom of the deck. A lot of times I will look to the bottom of the deck in order to suss out, a theme, just confirmation sometimes that the reading is, tapping into some facet of what I'm reading about or whom I'm reading about. It's just a way of gaining some extra confirmation, validation, and insight. The stork is super interesting because we are talking about a woman who had been pregnant and literally just days away from giving birth. We also know from the facts of the case, at least insofar as what the chief, I think it's the chief sergeant, I don't know, the big poobah, the big head honcho. From the presser, he made it clear that the person arrested, Christopher Preciado, indicated that Matthew and Savanah were coming to, deliver him drugs. It was determined also in the same presser, the head honcho guy made mention that the police at the scene were told by family members who were there of both that indicate that evidently the 2 individuals, Matthew and Savanah, sold narcotics through social media and their phones, through their phones. So the fact that it is, I guess, I don't want to say it's a fact yet because I feel like there's still so much that's going to come out, but I feel like it's pretty clear that this was a drug deal of some sort, of delivery. The stork is all about deliveries. Even if you just think about, what you commonly know about the stork, brings the baby, it's a new arrival. It is some sort of delivery or, new phase, is another word that you can, or new phrase that you can associate with this card. But the fact that she was literally days away from giving birth, as well as we know that there was a drug deal. They were going to Christopher Preciado, where they haven't specified quite yet whether it was at Christopher's home or if it was elsewhere. But we do know that Matthew and Savanah had traveled to Christopher with, I suppose, the intent to sell drugs. So the stork already, just from what was on the bottom of the deck, already tells me, okay, this is definitely hitting on what I already know to be facets of this case and the situation. Again, validation and confirmation of just what we know, and that the cards are speaking to this. I'll get to this other card that you see up here towards the end. But we're going to begin here first with the first pairing, which is here with the two first cards, and we have Crossroads and we have the Fox. Now you're going to notice me, I've got a ton of notes because when I first was doing this reading, I work as a claircognizant. Things come, that autumn knowing, that clear knowing comes in very quickly, along with the cards. So I wanted to get down everything that was coming in. But if you look at the Crossroads, so Crossroads are, this is the card about choices. It is about having sometimes many choices. It is opportunity. It is indecision. If you're standing at a crossroad and, you're not sure, what path is the quote unquote right path that you should take. It sometimes indicates separation. I don't really feel that that's applicable in this particular reading, but it is really about, again, being at a crossroads, having indecision, having choices to make. And when we look at the Fox individually, because remember, I'm just kind of giving you an overview of each card, and then I will go into them as pairs, which is how they're actually read in a reading. A Fox is selfishness. It can be self-care. It is deviousness, trickery, cunning, sneaky as a fox. The fox comes in and, will steal shit out from right under your nose and whisk away. They're trying to get away with something. The fox can sometimes relate to money. So that's another theme. It can relate to our work, our career, what we do to earn our money. So it definitely has some shady qualities to it. But when you look at these two cards together, I thought it was very interesting because there's a few things that were coming through. First, there was a sense that Matthew had quite a bit of indecision around whether or not, to even make this run. Should I do this? Should I, have all this going down right before, again, they were a day and a half, 2 days away from the scheduled birth of their baby. But it really does, to me, indicate that there was a lot of deliberation on one or both of their parts, Matthew or Savanah. Maybe they both were, kind of suspicious and concerned as to whether or not, they wanted to take this path. Did they want to go and travel and do this? Was this the right choice? The suspicion aspect comes in with the fox. So there was a very clear indication that something, maybe it was a gut feeling, maybe there were other facets of this that just weren't sitting right, but there was a sense of, I don't know, something just, doesn't seem right, doesn't feel right, should I do this, should I not? So there's just a sense of really kind of being on the fence about it. Obviously, we know they chose to still go and to make this delivery. But it's clear that they already kind of had their spidey sense going off in terms of making this run. The selfishness was sticking out to me as well. And again, like everything that I say through these readings on this channel, probably should have said this at the beginning as a sort of, warning. This is allegedly, okay, these are not facts. Energy does not lie. Yes, I am a psychic. These are the cards. But, we want to put that out there, that allegedly. But again, energy doesn't lie. And the selfishness really stood out to me because there was something about this where he perhaps felt that this was fishy, that it wasn't quite on the up and out. There was just something kind of nagging and pulling at him. And there was an aspect of selfishness that came up in two regards. And it made me curious, okay, did he take Savanah with him because it was sort of, well, I'm not feeling totally trusting of this person. Maybe Chris had never bought anything from him before, so maybe this is totally new, so they don't have any sort of, work relationship. Do I bring Savanah as sort of a buffer? Because, who harms a pregnant woman, right? It's inconceivable, sadly, not so much now with this case, but that was something that came to mind. The other thing was, okay, was this selfishness on his part, like he was wanting to make, sort of these last deliveries, or maybe it was more than one. I don't know. But we know he was at least going there for this one. Was there something about this, the selfishness was kind of pulling at me, like he was trying to get something done. And I feel like the cards as we go on, I feel like there's some confirmation of that, because it does feel to me that, getting that money, making that money, getting this deal done and over with, there was something about that just kind of rang in a sort of selfish way, selfish essence here. So the deliberation and cunning, this was something else that really stuck out to me, but actually with regards to Chris, whenever you see the fox, it's kind of going to pull at you. We know this to be a card of cunning. We know this to be a card of trickery, of deception, theft, especially that related, to around money. I'm sure it can indicate theft or thievery around material items, outside of that. But money is often another sort of association with this card. And the thing that stood out for me is that I don't for 1 second, and again, this is my opinion, I don't believe that Chris, that this unaliving just happened because a series of unfortunate events. If you have been following the case, they did release the affidavit, where essentially Chris is trying, Christopher Preciado, I should probably call him by his full name. We're not on a first name basis, thankfully. Christopher Preciado paints this as there was a scuffle, Matthew pulled a gun or somehow a gun got involved. And so there, through the scuffle and the manhandling of the pew pew, whoops, I think I said the other word, don't come down on me, lords of YouTube, that somehow through that altercation, that scuffle, the pew pew went off. And that is how each of them were unalived. So he's kind of painting it as this very random, unintentional, unplanned, even somewhat self-defense, kind of occurrence. I don't believe that for a second. The fox is cunning. The fox is trickery. There could have been trickery involved in even the whole deal, what motivations were behind it, and we'll get to that as we continue to go on. And I'm actually going to make another video about sort of, some topics related to, if Christopher acted alone, etc. But, the fox is really just, it's deception and it's deception and it's wanting to get away with something. And when it's paired with crossroads, we are seeing again that deliberation, that questioning, that planning, weighing the pros and cons. And all of this speaks of premeditation. It speaks of forethought, some sort of planning. So I don't at all, feel, that whether it was just as a robbery, whether there's a greater conspiracy around it, I can't say for certain. And there are like a ton of different theories that are out there and different speculations, around that. But the fox is sneaky and cunning. It's gonna steal shit right out from underneath your nose. It's gonna try to get away with something. And anytime it's paired with that crossroads, that there's deliberation. There could even, maybe he did have indecision around this, especially if it was just himself acting and it was, motivated by money or robbery of some sort. It's just clear with these two cards, in my opinion, that this was not something that transpired in the way that Christopher Preciado made it sound in his statement upon being arrested. All right, so the next two pairs that we have here are the Star card and the Mountains. Hopefully you guys can see this okay. I'm trying to use some very stand out colors, red, etc. But the stars on its own, it's inspiration. Not seeing a lot of that in this case. It's something at night, something happening at night. It is progress to goals, dreams, inspiration. It's also a lot of times when I see this card, it speaks of clout. If you think of stars, celebrities, fame, fortune. So the fact that the fox already has been presented in this reading, it has associations with money, the street life and the life that evidently Matthew Guerra was a part of, with selling drugs and kind of having this street life that he very much was into. Is this something that, that Christopher Preciado wanted a piece of? Is this something that he was doing or that he was endeavoring upon for some sort of clout? Again, just when you look at the Star card, especially when you have something going down like this, clout really, that word just kind of threw itself out at me. But again, it's something that happens at night or something at night. That's when the stars come out, or at least that you can see them. And a lot of times it's progress towards goals. So if you think of, navigation back in the day, you would turn to the stars, even if you're a hiker. My husband's a huge hiker. There's times where you look to the sky to orient yourself, and to know which direction to go into. So the stars can also indicate progression towards a goal of some sort, which stood out for me as well as the clout and the, obviously something at night, because it's been said through law enforcement that it was sometime just before midnight or late in the evening on December 21st that this all went down. Excuse me. Okay, so that's the stars. Then we have the mountain. This is difficulty. It's impairment, obstruction, hurdles, challenges. So it's even struggles just, physically and in terms of, seeing your way through of some sort. And when I look at the pairing of this, we're looking at something that is taking place at night. There is some sort of progress towards a goal. Was Matthew trying to make a particular quota? He was, getting ready to go in for the birth of his son, Fabian. Perhaps he had a certain quota to meet. My understanding of what I've learned is that, he was but, one fish in a pond with bigger fish, and everybody, that's lower down, that's one of the smaller fish, they pay the bigger fish, for like a cut of some sort. So did he have to pay his supplier? Was there something about moving forward, especially considering that the crossroads already and the fox was showing some indecision on his part, some suspicion, some uncertainty rather, around whether to even make this run, but was there something about needing to progress towards a goal, meet a quota, etc., that led them to actually moving forward and ultimately, proceeded to take the path towards making this run. So when I look at this also from Chris's perspective, what was coming through for me, we know, I'll back up and say that we know, obviously, that Matthew and Savanah clearly, there was an obstacle for them, a pretty final one, sadly, which again speaks to the mountain. But I also see when you have the star card and you have, I'm just making sure I'm getting all the things that I have here. Yeah, so I feel too the star card and the mountain card speaks to aggressiveness. It speaks to kind of, coming out of the gate strong, being forceful, having distrust and letting that distrust fuel particular actions. So when I see this, it makes me wonder, okay, because Matthew already had some suspicions or doubts, or his spidey sense was just kind of going off around this. Did he kind of come out of the gate strong? Did he did he act like a tough guy, or present his pew pew in some way, or even just showed it or had it visible, therefore kind of ruffling Christopher Preciado, and things escalated. That could be, something, I can't say for certain. And again, that's not to suggest that, Matthew caused anything, because no, that was just part of the lifestyle if that happened. But it does feel to me that, it just there was friction already, and it feels like there was friction and tension on both sides, on Matthew and Savannah's, as well as Christopher Preciado's, that it just kind of feels a little pressure cooker like, if you will, where things could escalate excuse me, rather quickly. The two of these together also indicate potential impairment. So was Christopher Preciado under the influence of something? There's been a lot of other readings that various readers have done that I've seen over the course of the past week or so. I'm always very cautious, and I tell my students to be very cautious around reading, watching those. Not because you shouldn't. I mean, it's always interesting. And I do find that when there's certain themes, you can kind of see certain patterns when certain things are, coming up across multiple different readers. Doesn't make it necessarily fact, but that sort of synastry can sometimes, kind of lead to a particular sort of confirmation or validation. Why is it coming, these similarities, coming through all these different, channels, through all these different intuitives? Is it just part of the collective consciousness at this point? Is it because, that message is really, being driven, to each of these particular channels because of it potentially being valid? It could be all of the above, you never really know. The thing is, when you look at readings, not to internalize them, don't wash them over and over, and even this, when you are going through and you are listening to something like this and you're receiving an interpretation like this, it's always important to run it through your own bullshit detector, to have your own intuitive sort of, check in to see if something comes up that's different, see if it feels right to you. Like, you never accept this stuff hook, line, and sinker like it's absolute gospel, which I think is a given, but I'll say it anyways. But my point is that a lot of different readers have spoken about addiction, and about, dependence. So, was that Matthew's dependence or addiction to the lifestyle? Considering the mountain showing here with the star card, is there impairment? Was Christopher Preciado under the influence of something and therefore, started to do or behave in unimaginable ways? I do understand that, again, this is not justification, so don't get it twisted. But people under the influence of certain narcotics, certain illicit substances, they go insane and they do some unimaginable, inhuman shit, which I think we all agree, was done here to these three people. So that's kind of what I'm seeing with the star and the mountain card. We know that this was something that was happening at night. They were navigating their way to Christopher Preciado. They did say, law enforcement did say that they had recovered Savanah's phone and that she had done sort of a Google map. Maybe it was a Google search in general for Christopher Preciado's address. So there's navigation in that regard. Potential Matthew trying to move towards a goal, trying to accomplish something, meet some sort of goal that maybe he had to make in terms of offloading these substances, getting the money, paying his person, whatever it may be. We know clearly they were obstructed from accomplishing said goal, but also we can glean from the two cards that there was some sort of tension, likely on both sides, Savanah Matthews as well as Christopher Preciado's, and that kind of, there was some sort of conflict, there was some sort of disagreement between Christopher and Matthew. I'm going to have to say probably, yes. Does it go beyond that? Meaning, is this being orchestrated, or is this some sort of goal being put forth by other people that perhaps have some sort of beef with Matthew or Savanah or both? Again, we can only speculate, but those two cards really do speak to some sort of conflict, struggle, and obvious obstruction. So now we're going to look at whip and clover. And whip is punishment. It's repetitive actions. Like if you think of hitting somebody, it's violence. You're you're spanking constantly, or you're hitting your fist, repetitively. If you think of back in the day, if somebody was whipped, it wasn't, oh, pew, pew, like it was a repetitive, multiple strikes with said whip. It was a repetitive action. So it's something done over and over. It is disagreement. It's conflict. It is passionate opposition and punishment of some sort, aggression, violence. I think I already mentioned. So that's whip on its own. Then you have clover, which is two of something. We know that there were two physical people in this presence. Obviously we know she was pregnant with baby Fabian, but there were two unalivings. This was a violent act against two people. Clover is also about opportunity. It's about it's about luck. It is trying to get in on an opportunity. So again, I already kind of mentioned that when you look at whip and clover together, this is a violent act committed against two individuals. Clover representing two of something. We're also seeing, that sort of violent act and aggression, conflict. Again, part of me is very curious if this is isolated to just a conflict between Christopher Preciado and Matthew and Savanah, because, again, I guess we might learn more. Maybe there is a deeper, more involved history between these parties. But as of right now, and I would say too, even with some of the suspicions and the lack of trust that is showing and has been expressed with some of the previous cards, I don't know that I really feel that there's an extensive history between these parties. So it begs the question, okay, is this beef that, that somebody had against Matthew and or Savanah, that was beyond, Christopher. Was Christopher sort of the person who, was chosen, or asked or tasked with doing this? Was he trying to do it for clout? Was he trying to do it for something else? Again, we're just speculating, but it does seem like some sort of repetitive, because we do know that they, from what at least was shared, it may not be everything, but it sounds as though that they were unalive from an individual, like a solo sort of pew pew wound, um, a piece. So yes, obviously we know it's more than one against two people, but there's also this part of that whip energy, because it is very passionate, very aggressive, very, again and again and again. What came to me is, okay, was there something done multiple times? Maybe, Matthew had beef with somebody multiple times. That created a large conflict that now kind of, because that's the other thing that I didn't mention, is whip can speak to sort of retribution. You can speak to this sort of, punishment or something delivered as a reckoning, revenge, things of that nature. So, how does that play a role in this? Is this something that is part of a larger conflict, and Christopher Preciado just happened to be dumb enough to say, oh yeah, I'll do this, get some clout, some street cred, again, speculating here, but there just is something about that speaks to just greater involvement, and there being something bigger at play. And maybe it doesn't involve other people. Maybe there is a deeper history here. But I'm just, this is one of those facets where, upon learning of who it was that they charged, you kind of just scratch your head, because you're like, wait a minute, that just, something about this just doesn't quite sit right. And that doesn't, again, mean that it's not in fact the situation, that he isn't, and he alone solely responsible for this. But this is, to me, it feels, like it gives some weight to those who have questioned whether we have the whole picture or not. So that leaves us finally with, I'm going to back up. Clover also speaks to opportunity. And we've already had the notion of clout or street cred come in. Fox mentions, money, something that was not just coming through insofar as on Matthew's side or Savanah's side, where they were making this deal and doing this run to get money for the selling of substances, but it was coming through on Christopher Preciado's side as well. Is this an opportunity, a crime of opportunity, where because Matthew and Savanah had, it's been all over the news and social media. So I feel like I can say it as fact that he had a telegram that was just, flashing photos of pews, of illicit substances, stacks and stacks of cash. I think that they had some of this posted on other social media channels, TikTok, etc. So, it seems as though Matthew and Savanah were quite open and kind of flashy about their lifestyle, what they did, what they had, money, etc. So is this motivated, a crime of opportunity? Did Christopher need money for something? Was this really more about, wanting to rob them, and things escalated? It's something to keep in mind when you look at that Clover card with the whip card as well. So now we see that we're right here at the end, and what we have is the man card. There's obviously a man, two men actually, that have at this point in time been arrested for this crime. We know that one, Matthew was, of course, male. So it seems like a nice little period at the end of the sentence. But if I were to read even just these final three cards, look at what that tells us. a violent act committed or perpetrated against two individuals by a male. Not that there's any doubt, because it sounds as though through the affidavit and the statement upon arrest that Christopher Preciado acknowledged, that he was, inadvertently in his, statement responsible for their unalivings. I don't, again, buy that at all. But even just those three cards at the very end, I feel confident that we have, insofar as the isolated experience of the act, the law enforcement has the right person, the correct person. Again, whether there's, more to this story, deeper sort of ties to this or not, who knows? It again is just something to keep in mind, and I'll go into that as we go in now to the mirroring. So when we mirror in a spread, what I'm doing first is I'm going to look at the first card and the last card. So I'm looking at crossroads and man. So we already know that both the males, it was coming through for both Christopher Preciado as well as Matthew, deliberation. Should I do this? Should I not? Indecision, standing at the crossroads. We know that quite literally this was a crossroad moment for each of their lives. Their choices, each of them, their choices that evening changed the course of life indefinitely for both of them. So we already know from that standpoint, that there was clearly each of those men were standing at a crossroads, and they were really the decisions, the power of those decisions in those moments. So anyways, when we mirror the first and the last card, as demonstrated here, you would read what crossroads and man, you'd read that as a pair, as we just did. So it's an indecisive man, a decision made by a man, but also a decision made about a man. So one of the things we've already brought up is there a greater sort of, theory behind this, or, a conspiracy behind this? Is there, did somebody else make the decision? We already know Christopher clearly did to make the decision to commit these acts, but was there somebody else who made this decision about Matthew? When we look at crossroads and man as well, what we see is a man with many faces. A man who may present himself as one thing to one person and another thing to another, and so on and so forth. Christopher Preciado, if you have seen the perp walk, if you've seen any images of him, you I think that's part of what, kind of makes you scratch your head a little bit. And it's like, who is this Rapunzel looking motherfucker? Like, he did this? I mean, not to say that, anybody of any, look can't commit a violent act or a crime, but you kind of look at him and you're like, I don't know, is this really him? But if he wears many faces, there could be parts of him, sides of him that, most people, thankfully in this case, have never seen. What I also thought was interesting about the phrase coming through, a man with many faces, is the notion of, does that also indicate that perhaps, many men, are there multiple male faces that had a hand in this crime? And since the focus of this were the circumstances around this crime, we're really taking that really bird's eye view, as much as we're getting into the nitty gritty of the individuals. And again, this is why this tool is so fantastic, insofar as detail and clarity. Even though we're taking this very broad view, we do look at it and we think, okay, well, is this many other faces? You know, we know Ramon and Christopher Preciado were charged in this crime, and had their various charges that they were charged with. But are we looking at other faces that are also involved in this? Other male faces that were a part of this fated crossroad, moment, the choices that were made here, and made about Matthew, and what was to happen. Something to chew on. So the next mirroring pair here is the Fox card with Clover. We read these two as a pair. So this is suspicion about an opportunity. It is suspicion or doubt around one's luck. And when we look at the fact that, it was showing Matthew as deliberating, should I make this run? Is this the right thing to do? And we also had the stars hinting at like having to progress towards some sort of goal. Well, I better knock this out, meet this quota, offload this shit before Fabian is born and life totally changes. So I'm going to get this done tonight. But there's a sense when you look at Fox and Clover, there's a sense of, was this a deal that came through? Again, I'm going to go with what I'm picking up and feeling and what the cards seem to confirm, which is that this is a brand new or very, very new relationship or involvement between Christopher Preciado and Matthew and Savanah. So there's no trust yet established. Was this some sort of massive order that came in? That just seemed too good to be true. Was it happened to be like just the amount that he needed to pay off the people he had to pay, as a part of his dues? Was it just maybe a little bit over, just seeming to be too good to be true? So when we look at Fox and Clover, there's just a sense of not really trusting an opportunity, not trusting one's luck. And that's some ways that we could look at the pairing of that from Matthew's side. One of the other ways that and this is why I always write things down, because even as I was sitting here looking at these two cards, there was just something that was coming through insofar as, trickery and deception, and maybe it'll come back to me. It just felt like there was something about Fox and Clover, there was trickery involved with these two individuals. That's what it was. Trickery behind or involved getting, and arranging this meetup between these two people, between Christopher Preciado and Matthew and Savanah. Was it under the guise of a deal, and then there were other parties involved or other parties there upon, their arrival that played a role in this? Was it a setup of some sort? There's deception and trickery, which obviously, if the intent is robbery, which we've touched on, then that clearly, already is pretty self-explanatory. But likewise, there, even as I was looking at it here, and I didn't have this written down, I was checking to see if I did. That's why I write it down all the time, because I don't always get it locked in the memory with how fast it comes in. But there was something about feeling as though there was trickery or deception, conspiracy around getting, Christopher Preciado or getting Savanah and Matthew to a particular location, which is interesting because I don't know yet that they've confirmed that the actual unaliving, the pew pew, shots were at the Preciado house. We know that their GPS, their navigation took them there, but nothing's been said as to whether there's confirmation that the crime took place there, if they stayed there for the duration and then, were transported. We know that Christopher Preciado met his father in the parking lot where the car was eventually found days later. But did they go somewhere else? Or were there other people involved, or that were there upon Matthew and Savanah's arrival? But there's something about even how they were brought together that just stinks of deception and trickery and conspiracy setup. So that is how I would read Fox and Clover together. So now we have the Star card and the Whip. So violence at night, Whip being violence, stars being something at night. So sometimes, because Star card is actually like on its own, it has its tonality is rather positive. Obviously, we know in the context of how we're reading it, as well as the pairings, it's not so positive. But there's something about the Star card and Whip that also makes me kind of feel as though, Matthew sort of shoved aside his suspicions, his own sort of gut feeling that something just wasn't on the up and up. Maybe it felt too good to be true. Maybe Christopher Preciado just came across as kind of hinky. Like there was, I'd be willing to bet a lot that there was some serious suspicion and deliberation on Matthew's part around even doing this deal. But it appears to me with the Star card and Whip that he ultimately shoved those aside and chose to instead believe and have hope, have faith that everything would turn out okay. There was a sense of having and just trusting that everything would be okay. And obviously we know that is ultimately a decision he would come to regret. But there's a feeling here of his ultimately making the choice. Could we theorize that selfishness played a role, that maybe he brought her for a selfish reason, hoping it would bring a buffer of protection, to kind of squelch some of his indecision about this, his suspicions, his concern about this. Maybe, yeah, sure, selfishness around even doing it to earn that money, to, offload his stuff, to meet his quota, whatever it may be, sure. But it does feel that he ultimately, really just tried to proceed anyways, just on faith, trusting that everything would turn out okay. And that faith component, that trust, that hope, that's all the Star card, hoping that everything will turn out okay, trying to just trust that despite that repetitive, kind of inkling, nudging from his intuition, his gut, however you want to put it, that something just wasn't right. He, chose to have faith that everything would work out okay. And damn, if that's just not heartbreaking. And maybe one of the other things that I had written down that I haven't mentioned yet is, when you look at some of these cards in the context of them, progressing towards a goal, feeling that, luck was too good, the deal was too good, not really trusting it. Even if, so let's say that there are no other parties involved, it wasn't a robbery. Could there be a hint, or rather not that there weren't other parties involved? I backtrack. Let's say that with all the things that we talked about the interpretation of these cards, maybe there was a part of him that had already chosen or was making the choice, moving towards the choice of, I'm going to do this run. I'm going to offload this stuff that I have before the birth of my son, and I'm going to get out of the game, or I'm going to hit pause, and just be done. And the reason I bring this up again, there's a lot in this reading, and there's been just a lot within just my own senses that has been coming through, making me feel that other parties were involved, that this was a bigger situation than just a substance deal gone bad. That there's something more going on here, something bigger, and potentially, therefore, other parties involved, men with many faces, involved in the choices and the decision. But there's a lot about money and progression towards goals and street cred and clout and fame that are also a part of this selfishness. So it's something to think about. And I did write it down because it came as, if he was getting out of the game. And I think his dad had mentioned that, there was some discussion about that. I don't know if it was, elaborated much on, but if he was, we have to remember that Matthew was just one fish in a very large pond with much bigger fish who were calling the shots, who all the little fish gave their cut to in order to operate business in, the bigger fish's area. So if he were to have made the choice, or if he had made the choice to remove himself from that business, that life, that leaves a void where previously, had been an earner, somebody who made money for the bigger fish. So, did that cause some sort of beef? Did that bring about a conflict? Did that cause, was the absence of that income, that money coming in, was that something that perhaps created a conflict that caused somebody to make this choice, to ask for this to happen, or to demand that it be done, or, whatever it may be? I don't think, if that is the case, I don't believe whatsoever that Christopher Preciado is anything more than a patsy. I don't feel at all that he that he is, maybe he wants to be a big guy on the street. Maybe he wants to have that street cred. Maybe there was some idolatry or some envy, around what he saw, on Matthew's social media and the lifestyle that he kind of put forth, that made it look all glamorous and rich and this, that, and the other. Maybe, maybe that was all there was to it. But I don't at all believe that Christopher Preciado, or even his father, Ramon Preciado, are some of those bigger fishes. It feels to me, if anything, they Christopher Preciado could very well have been roped, because of his own insecurities, his own, sort of longing to belong, etc., into it. I am going to do a reading in greater depth on that, so I'm not going to touch on it more. But I just felt it important to say that even if there was, validity to the notion that, say Matthew was getting out, that left a void where previously he had, filled, and therefore, what's the word I'm looking for? Thinned the wallets of the bigger fish, or not, thus causing, a conflict that resulted in this. We don't know, but I felt it prudent to at least acknowledge I do not at all, and I'd be willing to bet the hair on my head that Christopher Preciado or Ramon Preciado are, in fact, those big fishes, closely tied to those big fishes, unless it's like a dog following, like a lost puppy, wanting and envying and aspiring towards that clout, that way of life. Beyond that, they just, nothing about them gives me a feeling of their having any power whatsoever, aside from that, which obviously, which is a significant power, don't get me wrong, but on the level I'm talking about, not relevant per se, they don't have the power that I'm speaking about in this context. Okay, so the other thing I do want to mention, I'm putting a lot of theories out there because, again, this is kind of what fascinates me about it, and I always like to pull from the various theories, and there's so many more that people have put out. Some of it just leave you kind of shaking your head. But if it pulls at me intuitively enough, then I bring it into just part of the context of the reading from an interpretation standpoint. And that, we've looked at the fact that, this was a potential high, high in stress, high tension, experience that escalated too quickly, resulting in this. We've looked at whether or not Christopher Preciado had the motivation of money or robbery of some sort. The other parties involved from previous beef, Matthew getting out, we brought all of those into even just looking at the this broad reading. But one of the others that I haven't mentioned yet is that tragically, Savanah Soto's brother, Ethan Soto, who's 15 at the time, just a year prior to this tragedy, this crime, he was unalived. Evidently, he, I don't know a whole lot about it. I believe from what I read that he was accused of stealing substances from some guy and had a female, I believe, arranged to contact Ethan, Savannah's brother, to buy something. It was going to be a deal that went down, arranged to have Ethan have him meet her at a specific location. And it was really, I think it was just on a street, in the middle of the street there. And when Ethan did go to that location to make this deal, this guy who had accused him of stealing substances from him ended up unaliving him. Pew, 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 pew. And he died very young and very tragically. Not even, I think it was a year, maybe just a little over from when Savanah was lost in this tragedy. So that family, like your heart just, when you think about that. But I digress. I bring this up because there was a video going around about how during one of the court hearings, I don't know what kind of hearing, pretrial, arraignment, whatever, the person, and I don't recall his name, I think it might have been Victor or something, but don't quote me on that. The person accused and charged with Ethan Soto's murder, he was there for his court hearing. Members of Savannah's family, I know that her brother was one of them for certain, because he actually was still incarcerated for the charges that resulted in this interaction when she passed and had to be released to attend her funeral. But I did read somewhere, and again, whether it's the case or not, I can't say for certain, that Matthew was also one of the individuals who was in the gallery, the audience, I guess, at this hearing that Ethan Soto's killer was in attendance of. It was a hearing for him. I think it was maybe just for him, maybe it was for other people. Again, I don't really know. But when he was called, or while he was standing there, the person, we'll call him Victor just for clarity's sake. Again, I don't know if that's actually his name. As he was standing there, either before the judge or getting ready to go before the judge, I guess he turned around to the family and friends that were in the audience there in the gallery. And I believe it was he flipped them off, which prompted them to hop over past the entry, the partition there, and proceed to beat the hell out of them. So the reason I bring this up is because you look at repetitive violence, you look at decisions of retribution, violence being perpetrated against two people as retribution, as can be expressed and suggested by the whip card. Is this, some sort of retaliation against the two of them for that, for that attack on Victor, the individual that was accused or has been charged with Ethan Soto's murder? And we know that her family members certainly were a part of it. And I do believe that I had read that Matthew was also a part of that as well. So again, just another theory to put out there and to keep in the back of the mind as you listen to this, or as you go back through it, or even as you interpret these cards for yourself, which I highly encourage you to do. Just something else to keep in mind, because that was another one that I don't know that I spent as much time with, because I don't feel it pulled at me as much as some of the others that I mentioned here in this reading. But, maybe you have a different take. Maybe it pulls at you a bit more. So finally, before I leave you for today, when you have a Lenormand card, a line read, oftentimes you will add up the numbers of the card and reduce them till you get to a number that of the deck. And I think it's 36. You would think I would know. I'm pretty sure it's 36. Yeah, 36 cards in a Lenormand deck. You don't add, in my case, I don't add the card that was at the bottom, which is Stork. I only add those that were in the line. And it added up to 119, which could be seen as 11. So 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 9 is 11, or it could be seen as 11 plus 9, which is 20. Hence the reason why I have this other card here, which I told you I would speak on, which is number 20, the Garden. Now, 11, we already know is whip right here. So we already know, we've gone into that card pretty heavily. So the cards add up to either whip or garden. And it really depends on kind of what school of thought you come to. Some readers will reduce it going from left to right. Some people will, add it up, 11 plus 9. I tend to do both. And in this case, this is a perfect example as why, because in this case, both of these cards tap into an essence of this case and what we're looking into. So remember that some of these extras, looking at the card at the bottom, adding them up and then seeing what cards, those give us additional insight. They give us validation or confirmation that the cards are in fact connecting to the energy and the circumstances that we're focusing on, etc. And in this case, both garden and whip clearly are on point. And I will explain garden because we haven't obviously covered that yet. And garden is social settings, it's social interaction, social media, Telegram, where Matthew ran a large part of his business. Again, this is fact. You can go and take a look at it yourself if you put in the legwork. It's been shared across multiple spaces, but it's all about social interactions. It's about social gatherings. We know that there was some sort of gathering that they were going to, whether it was with multiple other people unbeknownst to them or just Christopher Preciado. We can theorize that it was social interaction, likely through social media, that Christopher Preciado initiated this particular deal. So the garden really kind of, again, just adds some validation, may in fact provide additional insight or clues as to how, this particular deal went down. Obviously we don't know and they're not going to share with us, but I'm sure law enforcement has scoured the Telegram group who belonged, who, insofar as they can. I know that Telegram is often used in these sort of, below table kind of dealings because of the fact that it's encrypted and there's all these sort of secret sort of squirrel things involved so that people can protect their identity. But I'm sure that there's a way of getting information that they may want to get. So this could offer a clue that perhaps that was how they initiated the transaction. It was something through social media, that Telegram group, whatever it may be. So that's what the 20 up above is part of what this adds to. And again, 11, violence, retribution, revenge. Perhaps Christopher Preciado has an extensive enough history with these two, that in his mind, there was some sort of wrongdoing that he felt motivated by to commit this horrible atrocity. Who knows? Maybe it was something bigger. I'm kind of leaning more that, Christopher was sort of a follower of Pansy, and this perhaps has a bigger sort of energy to it, a bigger sort of narrative behind it. But, you know, we'll find out, I suppose, as this plays out, and as this runs runs through the process and in the legal proceedings and the justice system. But I hope that this has been informative and helpful in taking a look at just another very, creative way of working with intuitive tools. Lenormand is such again, fascinating and just an amazing tool, especially when you're trying to suss out a mystery. And give you an idea of how you can interact with and pair these cards together and read them. Again, you don't have to have you know any even interest in exploring intuitive gifts to be able to work with Lenormand and tarot and have very insightful, accurate, detailed readings. And if you're like me and you are interested in true crime and there's a fascination, to the mystery and the solving and the makeup of what motivates people, to do some of these things. If you happen to be on that same page as me, I hope that this has given you something to think of. I want to hear, what you feel about, what do you think about the ways in which I interpreted this? What I saw, what's your thoughts? What have you seen? Is there anything else that jumped out or stood out for you? Is there any particular pairing that had a different interpretation that kind of jumped out at you? This is meant to also be a learning tool. So I hope that if there's anything that kind of resonates with you, be it from what I interpreted or that resonates with your own intuition that came out, I want to hear it. I want to tool, figure this out with all of you and also help you explore working with these tools, these incredible tools, in new and inventive ways. So, all right. Yeah. So thank you so much. And, as I said, I'm going to begin doing more like this and covering the true crime because it really is a not so secret now, hobby and fascination of mine. And I love tying it and working with different intuitive tools when exploring true crime and the events and the people therein. But I hope that it also has taught you a little something and maybe even, spawned sort of a fascination and a desire to start learning Lenormand or tarot, but also maybe even deepen it if you have a little bit of experience with these cards. And if nothing else, give you something to kind of chew on and, again, share your thoughts. I want to hear what you think and yeah, what comes up for you. So I will be in touch soon. I will be posting some more and going live. 2024 is going to be a very big year. Something we'll be covering here soon too. And yeah, and before we go anywhere, as we suss into these details that we do know and theorize and speculate and explore psychological and other motivations and what have you, events unfolding. But these were three people with families who loved them, a teeny tiny baby that never even got to take his first breath, and lives just cut tragically short. So let's always remember that. Let's always have grace and sympathy and compassion. We explore these things, but always with the utmost reverence and honor and respect for these individuals, their pain, their family's pain, and always with the hope that justice will be served and that they rest in peace and serenity and power. So I will talk to you all soon. Mwah.